There was once a monk who lived near a noisy village market. Every morning, the streets erupted in chaos. Vendors yelling, carts clattering, people arguing. A traveler, disturbed by the noise, asked the monk, "How do you find peace in all this madness?" The monk smiled gently and replied, "The noise is around me. It is not within me." In a world where volume is mistaken for strength, choosing calm isn't weakness. It's defiance. It's a quiet revolution, a refusal to let someone else's storm pull you off center. Anyone can raise their voice, but to stay grounded when provoked, to breathe when everything around you is unraveling, that is uncommon. That is powerful. Your inner world is not public property. It's sacred. It deserves protection, not with armor, but with awareness. The real skill is learning how to hold your presence, not as a reaction to others, but as a commitment to yourself. Have you ever let someone's scream rattle something deep inside you? So deeply that, just moments later, you regretted it? That moment when their storm seeps into your calm, when their raised voice hijacks your peace and rewrites your entire mood. It happens fast. One outburst and suddenly you're not yourself anymore. You're reacting, defending, shrinking, or shouting back. Most people think control means taking over the moment, talking louder, standing taller, pushing harder. But real power doesn't shout. It listens, it doesn't react, it remains. In this video, we're not here to teach you how to win arguments or silence your critics. We're here to show you how to stay rooted when the winds rise, how to respond without collapsing into reaction, how to leave a situation not smaller but stronger, not bruised but more whole. If you've ever struggled to stay composed when voices got louder and tempers rose, you're not weak, you're human, and you're not alone, but you're about to become unshakable. Let's begin. Number 1, detach from the noise, not the reality. True detachment isn't about disconnecting from reality. It's about stepping back from the noise without abandoning the truth. When someone you care about raises their voice, it doesn't just hit your ears, it hits your nervous system. Your chest tightens, your breath shortens, and you're pulled between two ancient urges, to retreat or to fight back. For many men, especially those raised to either stay silent or assert dominance, these moments can feel like emotional traps. But Stoicism offers a third way. Not surrender, not retaliation, but mindful observation. A pause, a breath. The space between what they say and what you choose to become. I once spoke with an older father who shared a moment that shaped his life. His adult son, after years of support, asked him again to co-sign a loan. The father said no, not out of anger, but principle. The son erupted. Accusations flew. The father felt the urge to justify, to argue, to list every past sacrifice. But he didn't. Instead, he paused and asked himself, "What is this really about?" That question shifted everything. He saw that the outburst wasn't about money. It was about entitlement meeting a boundary. So instead of matching fire with fire, he stayed still. He didn't explain, didn't retreat. He just remained centered. And in doing so, the storm lost momentum. The argument didn't escalate. It ended. That's what Marcus Aurelius meant by, "You always own the option of having no opinion." Not indifference, but inner freedom. When someone yells, they're often trying to pull you into their chaos. But the Stoic doesn't orbit noise. He anchors in clarity. Detachment isn't coldness, it's control. You don't detach from people, you detach from their distortions. You still see the situation clearly, stand your ground, and stay calm. You don't trade your peace for their approval or their pain. Older men especially know, words shouted in seconds can leave wounds for years. Real strength lies not in dominance, but in disciplined stillness. When someone screams, ask, "What's behind this? Does it belong to me? If not, don't carry it. Stand firm. Let the waves crash." You don't have to drown in someone else's storm. The next time chaos rises, remember, you owe no one your reaction. You owe yourself your composure. That's how you stay powerful, without ever raising your voice. Number 2, use silence as a shield. There is a kind of strength that doesn't shout, but still commands the entire room. It doesn't overwhelm, it doesn't seek the spotlight, yet it changes the atmosphere. That strength is silence, not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of presence. In a world that mistakes loudness for power, the man who remains calm while storms rage around him becomes something rare. And that rarity is deeply unsettling to those who rely on chaos to stay in control. Because here's the truth. Most people who raise their voices aren't seeking understanding. They're seeking control. Their volume isn't an invitation to connect. It's a tactic to dominate. And when you don't match it, when you stay grounded and quiet, you disrupt the performance. You deny it the reaction it feeds on. An older man once shared a story I've never forgotten. He was in his 60s, seasoned by years of family drama. One holiday dinner, his younger brother, always the instigator, launched into a public attack, calling him cold, selfish, and distant. The room went silent. Everyone braced for a fight, but the man didn't respond. He simply sipped his coffee. No expression, no comeback, just stillness. That silence grew heavy. His brother's voice faltered. His anger lost momentum. And slowly the energy in the room shifted. The outburst collapsed, not because it was challenged, but because it had nowhere to land. That is the power of silence used with discipline. Not to ignore, but to reflect. Not to flee, but to stand firm. As Epictetus said, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. And silence is a reaction, a powerful one. It says you are not owned by the moment. You are not baited by chaos. You are still here, fully present, but not participating in the drama. Many men grow up thinking silence means surrender, that to stay quiet is to lose. But the opposite is true. To remain silent when provoked is not weakness, it's control. It means you've trained yourself not to chase approval or react to every emotional swing. The man who sits in silence while being shouted at is not disconnected. He is deeply engaged, just not in the way his accuser expects. He's not focused on overpowering the other person. He's focused on not abandoning himself. Because most people who yell want confirmation. If you yell back, you validate them. If you explain, you give ground. But when you stay still, you reflect their imbalance. You break the cycle. You interrupt the storm. Maybe they won't admit it. Maybe they won't even understand it. But they will remember the man who didn't flinch. The silence that made their outrage sound hollow. This isn't superiority. It's sovereignty. You're not trying to rise above them. You're standing where you are, firm, calm, clear, because your peace is not for sale. In silence, you are not absent. You are deeply rooted. Your presence isn't loud, but it is felt. It's steady, like a mountain, like still water, like the eye of the storm. In a world hooked on reaction, the man who can hold his silence becomes something sacred. He becomes unshakable, untouchable by those who depend on chaos for control. So when someone tries to pull you into their emotional storm, pause, breathe. Let your silence speak the truth they've been too loud to hear, the truth about themselves. That is how you shift the power. That is how you remain still in the noise. That is how you use silence, not as retreat, but as a shield. Number 3, protect your boundaries without apology. There's a kind of scream that doesn't come from anger. It comes from shock. It's not rage at something wrong being done, but disbelief that something wrong is no longer being allowed. It's the sound of entitlement hitting a wall, of manipulation meeting a boundary it thought would never exist. And often that scream comes from someone you once loved, someone who once had silent, unchecked access to your time, your patience, your presence. When you finally say enough, they look at you like you've betrayed them, but you haven't. You've simply returned to yourself. A retired tradesman once shared a story that captured this. After his daughter's divorce, she moved in with him. At first, he welcomed her, no questions asked, but slowly the lines blurred. She treated his home, time, and resources as her own. She borrowed his truck without asking, woke him up at all hours and made last-minute demands, often guilting him if he had his own plans. He allowed it, not from weakness, but compassion. Until one day she screamed at him for not helping her move furniture. That was the moment he set the line. Not with anger, not with drama, just calm and clear. "This doesn't work for me anymore." And everything changed. She exploded. Accusations, tears, outrage. But he didn't move, because he understood what many forget. The scream wasn't about what he said. It was about what she could no longer control. This is the truth about boundaries. They don't cause chaos because they're cruel. They cause chaos because they remove unchecked access. When someone has grown used to your silence, your no feels like betrayal. But it isn't. It's balance. Stoicism teaches that boundaries are not rejection. They're order. Seneca once wrote that no man is more miserable than he who avoids all adversity. Sometimes that adversity isn't from enemies. It's from reclaiming your space from those who took it for granted. Setting a boundary with someone you love can feel cruel, but it isn't. It's clarity. And when clarity is met with shouting, remember, the noise isn't proof you're wrong. It's proof you've interrupted a system that relied on your compliance. Some people depend on your silence to maintain control. When you finally say no and mean it, they panic, not out of love, but because the game is over. The Stoic doesn't shout back. He doesn't justify his line or beg to be understood. He states his boundary and stands by it, without apology, without guilt, without performance. Because a man who knows the value of his peace doesn't trade it just to keep the room calm. He understands that sometimes real peace comes through conflict, not from avoiding it. That protecting your energy might cause tension today, but it creates freedom tomorrow. You don't owe repeated warnings. You don't owe softened language. You owe yourself honesty, even if you're the only one who hears it. If they truly care, they will adjust. If they only cared about power, they will push harder. Either way, you now have clarity. And in the realm of emotional self-respect, clarity is currency. The man who lives without boundaries invites chaos. The man who holds them calmly, consistently, unapologetically, invites respect. Not always instantly, but over time, people will remember that you didn't fold. Some will rise to meet you, others will fall away. That is not loss. That is life sorting itself out. So if someone screams when you say no, let them. If they guilt you for drawing the line, let them. Their reaction is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to your own integrity. Protect your peace. Honor your limits. And remember, peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the refusal to be controlled by noise. That is the Stoic path. Calm, clear, and unshaken. Unapologetically free. Number 4. Do not try to win the screamer over. Have you ever found yourself mid-sentence, explaining, defending, trying to be understood, only to realize the other person isn't listening at all? That this isn't a conversation, it's a performance. You're not speaking to be heard, you're speaking into a void. And the louder they get, the more you feel pulled to clarify, justify, prove your good intent. But that pull, the instinct to explain, is a trap. One that many men, especially those raised on reason, logic, and fairness, fall into far too easily. Because not all noise is confusion. Sometimes it's strategy. Some people don't yell because they're overwhelmed. They yell because they want control. They aren't looking for understanding. They're looking for dominance. They aren't trying to hear your side. They're trying to silence it. And when you respond with more words, more explanation, more effort to soothe or clarify, you're not resolving the situation. You're feeding it. You're stepping into a drama where truth isn't the goal. Control is. The Stoics knew this well. Epictetus said, "Only the educated are truly free." But he wasn't talking about schooling. He meant those who are emotionally mature. People who don't distort the truth into threats. People who can listen without trying to overpower. And when someone is screaming at you, accusing you, blaming you for things they've already made up their mind about, you are not in the presence of that kind of person. Trying to win over a screamer is like pouring clean water into a shattered glass. It doesn't hold. No matter how honest or thoughtful your words, they can't be received. And the more you pour, the more drained you become. This is the trap of emotional performance. It convinces you that effort equals resolution. But the truth is, many screamers aren't seeking clarity. They're reenacting a script where you're assigned the role of scapegoat. So what does the Stoic do? He doesn't engage, not from pride, not from anger, but from wisdom. He knows when words are helpful and when they're being weaponized. He knows his peace is not a bargaining chip. It's a boundary. It belongs to him. And when he stops explaining, everything changes. The pattern collapses. The cycle of provocation and reaction begins to break. Because those who use volume as a weapon expect a rhythm. I yell, you shrink. I accuse. You defend. I escalate. You chase. But when you don't move, when you stay calm, grounded, and unbothered, you disrupt their entire playbook. You hold your frame, and by doing so, you hold your power. This doesn't mean walking away from every disagreement, nor does it mean silence in every situation. It means discernment, the wisdom to know when your words are being received and when they're being used against you. Sometimes the wisest response is space, sometimes it's silence, and sometimes it's acceptance. The hardest one of all, the acceptance that some people don't want truth. They want control, dressed up as dialogue. And once you see that, you stop arguing with shadows. A man who understands the value of his words does not cast them into the wind. He speaks with intention. And sometimes the most powerful thing he can say is nothing at all. Not out of punishment, but protection. Protection of his clarity, his dignity, his inner balance. So next time someone raises their voice at you, remember this. You are not obligated to respond just because they're loud. You don't need to explain your worth just because they disapprove. Your silence is not weakness, it is sovereignty. The man who learns this doesn't become passive, he becomes powerful, unshaken, unafraid, unmoved by the storm around him. You do not need to win them over. You only need to remain whole. That is not stubbornness. That is discipline. That is strength. That is the Stoic way. Number 5, recognize the pain behind the volume. There's a kind of scream that doesn't just echo, it cuts. Not because it's loud, but because it carries something old, something buried. Pain with a voice. Neuroscience shows us that when someone erupts in anger, it's often not a calculated act of aggression, or it's a nervous system in survival mode. The yelling, the rage, the heat, it's the body's last attempt to feel safe in a moment that feels overwhelming. And this is where many of us, especially men, make the mistake. We assume the scream is about us. We hear the tone, the accusation, the attack, and we step into the fire, ready to defend, to correct, to push back. But Stoicism teaches a different instinct, discernment. Not every loud voice is speaking truth. Not every scream deserves a response. Not every emotional explosion is about you. Sometimes what you're witnessing is decades of silence suddenly shattering, fear, shame, grief, confusion, all surfacing at once. And if you absorb it as your fault, if you take the bait, you'll spend your life fighting ghosts that were never yours to battle. A man once told me about a colleague who lashed out during a team meeting. Sharp words, raised voice, complete breakdown. In the past, he would have fired back. But this time, he paused. He saw something beneath the anger, panic, not aggression, but desperation. So he said nothing. He let the storm pass. And later, the colleague confided in him. His child had just been diagnosed with a rare, life-altering illness. The outburst wasn't about the project. It was grief, misdirected. And had he responded with pride instead of patience, that moment would have done real, lasting damage. Marcus Aurelius urged us to consider the beliefs behind others' actions, not to excuse behavior, but to understand it. Because people who lash out often have a broken view of good and evil, shaped by pain they've never processed. You can't reason with a storm, but you can refuse to get pulled into it. That's Stoic strength. Not counterattack, but clarity. Not absorbing the chaos, but seeing it for what it is. A signal, not a sentence. When you stop confusing volume for truth, you take back your freedom. You stop trying to fix what you didn't break. You stop taking responsibility for emotions that aren't yours. And you become something rare, a steady presence in a world that confuses noise for honesty. The Stoic doesn't rush into every battle. He studies the field first. He knows that many outbursts are echoes of old wounds, and wrestling ghosts only creates more noise. That doesn't mean you abandon compassion. Stoic compassion is strong, not soft. It doesn't rescue, it respects. It sees the pain, but doesn't become it. It offers space, not sacrifice. It says, I see your struggle, but I will not collapse into it. I hear your scream, but I will not scream back. So next time someone shouts in your face, pause, not to cower, not to flee, but to ask the most powerful question a Stoic can ask. What is this really about? Because more often than not, it's not about you at all. And once you understand that, you step out of the role they've cast you in. You stop playing the part. You reclaim your role as the director of your response. And without yelling, without defending, without trying to win, you become immovable. Not by force, but by understanding. That is the Stoic way. To see pain without becoming it. To hold your peace in the face of chaos. To let their volume rise and still remain whole, calm, and unshaken. Because real strength isn't measured in decibels. It's measured in how quietly you can endure. Number 6, choose stillness over strategy. Every man will one day face a moment of intense confrontation. A moment when someone's voice rises with accusation, expectation, and chaos. In that moment, your instinct may scream at you to react, to speak, to defend, to explain. You might find yourself building arguments in your mind, planning the perfect rebuttal to prove your integrity or win the exchange. But the Stoic sees this differently. The Stoic doesn't seek to outmaneuver noise with more noise. He doesn't try to win through clever strategy or louder words. He seeks not victory over others, but mastery over himself. He chooses stillness, the kind of calm that cannot be shaken, no matter how loud the world becomes. There's a difference between reacting and responding. The first is a reflex, the second is a choice. Reacting is survival. Responding is sovereignty. Most people don't learn that difference, especially under pressure. We're conditioned to believe that strategy is strength, that the best response is a strong one. But often, that isn't power. It's fear in disguise. Marcus Aurelius didn't write about triumphing with words. He wrote about standing firm like a rock amid crashing waves. Not as metaphor, but as guidance. Because in the presence of emotional chaos, the most potent act isn't resistance or retaliation. It's stillness. When rage comes at you and you offer nothing in return, no argument, no escalation, something shifts. The energy collapses. The screamer, expecting combat, is left facing their own unprocessed emotions, no longer absorbed or deflected by you. A man once shared a story of a business dispute. His partner exploded with accusations and threats. Years ago, he would have matched the fire, but this time, he didn't flinch. He listened. He breathed. He remained still. The aggression unraveled, not because he won the argument, but because he refused to lose his peace. Stillness isn't passivity, it's presence, it's self-command. As Seneca said, no man is free who is not master of himself. When you stay centered while someone tries to pull you into chaos, you're not ignoring them. You're refusing to be shaped by them. Stillness sends a message. I see you, but you do not own me. This disrupts the expected script. Most people who yell are looking for a reaction. They want to provoke. They want to fight. When you don't respond as expected, they're left in an emotional vacuum. And that silence, that grounded presence, it can be more unsettling than any counter-argument. Make no mistake, this path is not easy, especially for men raised to never back down, to always assert themselves. Stillness is often misunderstood as weakness, but the Stoic knows the truth. The man who can remain still under fire is the one who cannot be broken. Sometimes resolution isn't the goal. Preservation is. You don't walk away to win, you walk away to remain whole. Stillness isn't a tactic, it's a vow. A decision to never let another person hijack your nervous system. It's saying you may scream, but I will not shatter. Not out of coldness, but out of clarity. Not every fight is yours to fight. And often the greatest victory is in restraint. There's a quiet strength in trusting that truth doesn't need to be defended, that your worth is not up for debate, and that your presence alone can be the loudest statement in the room. Let them yell, let them accuse, let them throw their words like stones. You don't need to block or return them. You simply remain rooted, present, whole. Because in meeting chaos with calm, you claim a power that strategy will never provide. So next time someone screams at you, remember, you are not required to win. You are required to remain. Not clever, not loud, just unshaken. And when the moment passes, as it always does, they will walk away unsettled. Not because you hurt them, but because you never needed to. The Stoic doesn't seek applause. He seeks peace, and he finds it not through dominance, but through discipline. Stillness is not how he wins battles. It's how he avoids the ones that would cost him his soul. As Epictetus said, freedom is the only worthy goal in life, and freedom is not found in satisfying desire, but in eliminating it, especially the desire to win a war that was never yours to fight. That is the art of stillness. That is the Stoic's edge. Number 7, do not return the fire. Reflect it. There's a moment, brief but defining, when someone is screaming at you, their voice sharp, their eyes wild, their pain flaring into accusation, and deep in your chest everything tightens. Your breath shortens, your jaw locks. 1,000 words push to the surface, each one begging to be fired back. That's the moment that defines everything. Not later, not after. Right there, in that sliver of stillness, before you react, you are standing at a fork in the road. Most men burn in that moment. Burn with the need to correct the story, to defend their name, to strike back with their own fire. But the Stoic chooses differently. He does not become what he resists. He doesn't meet fire with more fire. He reflects it. To reflect the fire is not to avoid it. It is to face it without becoming it. It is to allow the flames to rage without letting them catch inside you. This isn't detachment. It's presence without collapse. It's the strength to hold your ground without striking back. Because when fire looks into a mirror and sees nothing to burn, it loses power. It loses shape. It turns inward. A man once told me a story I'll never forget. He was a former soldier, trained for combat, sharp, tactical, precise. But the hardest battlefield he ever faced wasn't war. It was his living room. During a family intervention, his younger brother, deep in addiction and anger, exploded. Curses, accusations, threats. He shook with rage. He screamed to dominate. But the soldier did not move. He didn't interrupt. He didn't defend. He simply stood there. And when the storm finally collapsed into silence, he looked at his brother and said, "I hear you." 4 words, no lecture, no retaliation, just reflection. And in that silence, the fire had nowhere to land. It hadn't been absorbed. It had been seen. His brother sat down, not defeated, disarmed. This is what most men never learn. That true strength isn't how fast you respond. It's how deeply you remain unmoved. Because when someone is screaming at you, they're not just making noise. They're trying to seize your center. They want your energy, your clarity, your alignment. And the moment you raise your voice in return, you give it away. You hand them the very thing they were after, your balance. But the Stoic guards that inner world like a fortress. Just because chaos enters the room doesn't mean it has to enter you. As Epictetus said, we are not disturbed by what happens, but by our opinion of what happens. And when someone yells at you, they're already operating in a distorted version of reality. It is not your job to enter that distortion. It's your job to reflect it calmly, clearly, so they can finally see it. That's not weakness. That's mastery. Because when you refuse to match their energy, you force them to meet their own. You become a mirror, clean, still, and in that mirror, they see their own rage, unfiltered, undistracted, unmasked. For many, that is the first time they truly hear themselves. Yes, it's uncomfortable, but it's also sacred. It's where transformation begins. Most people scream not because of you, but because of pain they've never faced, trauma never healed, shame never spoken, fear never named. And when that pressure builds, it seeks release. If you take it personally, you will be pulled into their storm. But if you see it clearly, you remain free. The Stoic does not take ownership of someone else's chaos. He reflects it. And by doing so, he often liberates both. Because there's a discipline in stillness, a quiet, anchored strength in saying nothing. Not because you're weak, but because you're wise. You recognize that not every scream is an invitation. Some are just noise looking for a place to land. And if you do not host it, it cannot stay. Let them rage, let them accuse, let them perform. You stand, you breathe, you hold your peace. And when the fire tries to pull you in, you don't return it, you reflect it. Some will say this makes you cold. It doesn't. It makes you steady. Some will say it's detachment. It's not. It's self-possession. And some will say it's giving up. It isn't. It's rising above without condescension. The Stoic doesn't walk away to avoid the battle. He walks away to preserve what matters. And when he stands, it's not to dominate. It's to anchor. So the next time someone screams in your face, remember, their fire is not your responsibility. You don't need to match it. You don't need to fight it. You just need to remain. Because you are not the flame. You are the mirror. And when they finally see their own reflection, they'll either begin to wake up or walk away. Either way, you remain untouched, unshaken, unchanged. That is true power. Not in your voice, not in your arguments, but in your presence. The Stoic doesn't seek to win battles. He seeks to never become the war that tried to consume him. Remember, you don't have to attend every battle you're invited to. You didn't stay silent because you were weak. You stayed silent because your peace was too valuable to hand over. And in that silence, you won something greater than the argument. You won yourself. Stillness isn't a tactic. It's a way of living, a vow to master yourself, not control others. Because as Epictetus taught, the highest form of freedom is not in victory, but in releasing the need to win it all. If this message resonated with you, let it settle. Then drop a simple comment below. Stand still, so others know they're not alone in this kind of strength. And if you're walking this path of inner discipline, quietly without noise, consider subscribing. Remember, true power does not scream. It simply remains. See you in the next video.